Hello Mila, hello Jack. Welcome to Storytime with Grandad. Hello everyone else who's watching. Today's book is from the Mr Men and Little Misses series, and this is Mr Fussy. Mr Fussy was fussy about everything. Absolutely everything had to be neat and tidy and in its proper place. Mr Fussy spent all day and every day rearranging his furniture, making sure the flowers grew in a straight line in his garden, and trying to find specks of dust where there couldn't possibly be specks of dust, because he spent all his time making sure there weren't any specks of dust. One fine morning, Mr Fussy was having breakfast. He was very fussy about what he ate. He opened the marmalade pot. "Ah!" he exclaimed, "it's got bits in it." And he spent the rest of the morning separating the bits from the marmalade, or, if you prefer, the marmalade from the bits. Fussy old fusspot, people used to call him. Then Mr Fussy went out in the garden and spent the rest of the day straightening out all the blades of grass on his lawn. Fussy old fusspot. That evening Mr Fussy was in his kitchen ironing his shoelaces when he heard a crash outside. "What's to do?" he murmured to himself, and he hurried out to investigate. There, with a broken garden gate in one hand and an old battered suitcase in the other, and a sheepish grin on his face, stood an untidy person, Mr Clumsy. "Whoops," he said, holding up the garden gate. "It came off in my hand." "Who," spluttered Mr Fussy, looking in horror at his garden gate, "are you?" "I'm Mr Clumsy," replied the untidy person, grinning, and he stepped forward to shake Mr Fussy's hand, but tripped over and fell over on the lawn. "My grass!" cried Mr Fussy. "My straight grass! You've bent it!" And he got down on his hands and knees and started straightening the grass. "But who are you?" he asked over his shoulder, "and why are you here?" "I'm your cousin," replied Mr Clumsy, "your long-lost cousin from Australia. I've come to visit." "Aren't you pleased to see me?" continued Mr Clumsy cheerfully, knocking over a flower or two as he got up. And he picked up his suitcase, knocking over another flower or two, or three. Mr Fussy quite obviously wasn't pleased to see him. "You'd better come in," he muttered. "I say," remarked Mr Clumsy, looking through the front door of Mr Fussy's house, "I say, what a neat little place you've got here." And he stepped inside, tripped over his shoelaces, he often does, and knocked over a chair, and dropped his suitcase, and it fell in an untidy heap on the floor. "Whoops," he said. Mr Fussy shut his eyes and heaved a sigh, groaning silently to himself. Later that evening, after Mr Fussy had cooked them a meal, and after Mr Clumsy had helped with washing up, breaking 2 plates, they sat down to talk. Mr Fussy sat, as he always did, in a neat and tidy fashion. Mr Clumsy sat, as he always did, in a not so neat and tidy fashion. "How long are you staying?" asked Mr Fussy. "Oh, I don't know," grinned Mr Clumsy. "A few days, a week, a year, I haven't decided." When he awoke in the morning, Mr Fussy jumped out of bed and went into his bathroom. "Oh no!" he gasped. "Oh no!" Oh yes, Mr Clumsy had been there before him. The towels lay in a heap on the floor. The bath was full of water. There were pools of water all over the bathroom floor, and half a tube of toothpaste. What a mess! Mr Fussy made it all neat and tidy as quickly as he could. Then Mr Fussy hurried downstairs. "Morning," he said to his cousin cheerfully. "I've cooked you breakfast. Sit down." There was an awful mess everywhere. "There we are," said Mr Clumsy, carrying a plate of fried eggs, broken fried eggs, towards the table. "Breakfast." And then he tripped over those shoelaces of his, and then the eggs flew through the air, and they landed all over Mr Fussy. Sticky, greasy, yellow fried eggs. "Whoops," said Mr Clumsy. After a week, Mr Fussy's house didn't look like Mr Fussy's house any more at all. But after 2 weeks, Mr Clumsy decided to move on. "Thank you for having me," he said to Mr Fussy. "It was very nice to see you," replied Mr Fussy politely. But what he was thinking was, "It was very nice to see you going." "Cheerio," said Mr Clumsy, and off he went with his battered old suitcase. "Goodbye," called Mr Fussy, really meaning good riddance. Then Mr Fussy fussed around his house as he had never fussed before. Fussy old fusspot. Polishing and mending and repairing and straightening and sorting out and cleaning and putting everything back exactly as it'd been before Mr Clumsy had come to stay. He even dusted the flowers in the garden. That evening, Mr Fussy was in his kitchen polishing an egg when he heard a crash outside. "Oh no," he groaned, "not Mr Clumsy back again. It can't be. It mustn't be. It isn't." And it wasn't. It was somebody else. Somebody who had just walked straight through Mr Fussy's garden gate. Somebody who can't help having little accidents. Somebody you may have met before. "Hello," smiled Mr Bump. "I've come to visit." The end. Bye-bye, Mila. Bye-bye, Jack. I'll see you soon. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.